standing in the bathroom of the Marriott downtown, staring at my reflection while listening to my own son tell his colleagues that his mother couldn't make it tonight because she was dealing with some health issues. I felt something crack inside my chest. Through the thin bathroom door, I could hear David's voice carrying that apologetic tone he'd perfected over the years. The same tone he used when explaining why I couldn't attend his graduation dinner, his promotion celebration, or any event where his corporate world might glimpse the woman who raised him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Linda Morrison, and at 58 years old, I thought I understood disappointment. I'd been a single mother since David was 7, working 3 jobs to keep us afloat after his father decided that responsibility wasn't for him. I'd cleaned office buildings at night, waitressed on weekends, and took in alterations during the day, all while making sure David had everything he needed for school, sports, and the kind of future I'd never had access to. But nothing had prepared me for the moment I realized that the son I'd sacrificed everything for was now ashamed of the life that had made his success possible. The Marriott ballroom buzzed with the kind of energy that money creates. David worked for Harrison & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious consulting firms, and tonight was their annual partners' celebration. For months, he'd mentioned the event casually, always followed by some excuse about why I couldn't attend. Too formal, he'd say. You wouldn't enjoy it, Mom. It's just boring work stuff. But when I'd seen the invitation on his kitchen counter last week, with its elegant script and mentions of awards and recognition ceremonies, I'd felt that familiar ache of being deliberately excluded from his achievements. So I'd done something I'd never done before. I'd shown up uninvited. I'd borrowed a dress from my neighbor Patricia, spent money I didn't really have on having my hair done, and arrived at the hotel with the kind of nervous excitement I hadn't felt since David's high school graduation. The plan was simple: surprise him, meet the colleagues he talked about constantly, and finally see the world he'd built for himself. I wanted to be proud in person, to watch him receive whatever recognition was coming his way, to be the mother who showed up. Instead, I'd become the mother who hid in bathroom stalls. The evening had started promisingly enough. I'd found the registration table, given my name as David Morrison's guest, and been handed a name tag with a smile from the young woman checking people in. The ballroom was magnificent, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in pristine white linens. Men in expensive suits clustered around the bar, while women in designer dresses that cost more than my monthly rent moved through the crowd with practiced grace. I'd spotted David immediately. He stood near the far corner of the room, looking handsome and confident in a navy suit I'd never seen before. His hair was styled differently, more polished, and he held himself with the kind of casual authority that came from belonging in spaces like this. For a moment, watching him laugh at something a silver-haired man was saying, I felt pure maternal pride. This was my son, the boy I'd raised to be better than our circumstances, and he'd done exactly that. But then I'd started walking toward him, and everything changed. I saw the exact moment David noticed me. His face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked disturbingly like panic. He excused himself from his conversation and intercepted me halfway across the room, his hand gripping my elbow with unnecessary force. Mom, what are you doing here? His voice was low and urgent, the kind of tone you'd use to address a crisis. I wanted to surprise you, I'd said, suddenly feeling foolish in Patricia's borrowed dress. I wanted to see you get your award. David's eyes darted around the room, checking to see who might be watching us. You can't be here. I didn't put you on the guest list. The girl at the table said it was fine. I'm your guest. No, Mom, you don't understand. This is a work function. These are important people. Important people. The words hit me like ice water. I looked around the room again, this time noticing details I'd missed before. The easy confidence of people who'd never worried about money. The casual way they wore clothing that represented months of my salary. The subtle markers of wealth and education that I'd never learned to display. I clean buildings like this one, I'd said quietly. I know how to behave around important people. David's face flushed red. That's not what I meant. but we both knew it was exactly what he meant. "David, there you are." A woman in an emerald green dress approached us, her smile bright and practiced. "Jennifer's been looking for you. She wants to introduce you to the Peterson Group representatives." "Oh, hi, Sarah," David said, and I could hear the effort it took for him to sound casual. My mother had a question about directions to the hospital. She's visiting a friend." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that it took my breath away. Sarah smiled politely at me, the kind of smile reserved for service workers and other people who didn't quite register as fully human. "I hope your friend feels better soon," she said to me before turning back to David. "The Petersons are only here for another hour." "I'll be right there," David assured her. After she walked away, he turned back to me, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that might have been embarrassment. "Mom, I need you to leave." "David, I drove 2 hours to get here. I just want to—" "Please." His voice cracked slightly. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We'll have dinner this weekend. But right now, I need you to go." I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and honest and decent, and saw a stranger wearing his face. The boy who used to show me every report card, every trophy, every small victory, was asking me to leave before anyone important could see where he came from. "I understand," I'd said finally, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. And I'd turned around and walked toward the bathroom, not because I was leaving, but because I needed a moment to process what had just happened. I needed to understand how the child I'd loved unconditionally had grown into a man who saw me as a liability. Now, standing in that bathroom 15 minutes later, listening to David tell his colleagues that his mother was too sick to attend, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just hurt or disappointment, but a bone-deep understanding that the person I'd shaped my entire life around didn't want me in his. I heard laughter from the ballroom, the sound of people enjoying themselves without any awareness of the small tragedy playing out just yards away. These were David's people now, the ones whose opinions mattered more than the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him the education and opportunities that had earned him a place among them. I pulled out my phone and looked at the selfie David and I had taken just last month when he'd come to fix my kitchen sink. We were both smiling, his arm around my shoulders, looking like the team we'd always been. But apparently, that version of us only existed in my small apartment in the part of town where successful consultants didn't venture. The bathroom door opened, and a woman in an expensive black cocktail dress entered. She was probably my age, but everything about her screamed wealth and polish. Her jewelry was real, her handbag cost more than my car, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been asked to hide who she was. "Lovely event," she said, making polite conversation as she checked her makeup in the mirror. "Yes," I agreed. "Very nice." "Are you here with Harrison and Associates?" I looked at my reflection standing next.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
To hers. In Patricia's borrowed dress and my drugstore makeup, I looked exactly like what I was. Someone who didn't belong here. Someone whose presence would embarrass her son. "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm leaving early." But, as I said it, I realized I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Because walking away now would mean accepting David's assessment of me. Accepting that our relationship would forever be confined to my apartment and chain restaurants, where none of his colleagues might see us together. The woman left, and I was alone again with my reflection and my racing thoughts. I'd spent 30 years building a life around my son's happiness, making sacrifices that had seemed noble and necessary at the time. I'd worked jobs that destroyed my back and my pride because they paid enough to cover his school supplies and sports fees. I'd gone without new clothes so he could have the right sneakers, had skipped meals so he could attend summer camps with his friends. And somewhere along the way, those sacrifices had become sources of shame rather than pride. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard last month when David was on the phone with someone from work. He'd been talking about weekend plans, And when someone had apparently asked about visiting family, he'd said his mother lived a bit far away and that he didn't get to see her much. I lived 20 minutes from his apartment. 20 minutes had become a bit far away, when the truth was that I lived in a neighborhood his colleagues would never visit. The bathroom door opened again, and this time it was Sarah, the woman in the emerald dress who'd approached us earlier. She didn't seem to recognize me, which wasn't surprising. I was forgettable in the way that service workers and other people's mothers tend to be. "Excuse me," she said, checking her phone. "You don't happen to know if David Morrison's mother actually left, do you?" Jennifer wanted to meet her, but David said she had to go to the hospital. I stared at Sarah for a long moment, processing what she'd just said. Someone had wanted to meet me. Someone important enough that David was nervous about it, had specifically asked to meet his mother, and instead of introducing me, he'd created an elaborate fiction about hospitals and sick friends. "I think she might still be around," I said carefully. "Oh, good. Jennifer's been talking about family values all evening. She's very big on that. David's mentioned his mother before, how she raised him on her own, put him through school. Jennifer finds that inspiring. Family values." The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. David had built his professional reputation partly on the story of being raised by a single mother. But the actual woman who'd lived that story wasn't welcome in the room where it was being celebrated. "What has he told Jennifer about his mother?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Sarah leaned against the sink, apparently happy to gossip. "Oh, you know, the usual inspiring story. Single mom, worked multiple jobs, sacrificed everything for her son's education. Very heartwarming. Jennifer loves that kind of thing. She thinks it shows character, having that kind of background. Having that kind of background. As if my life was a story to be told rather than a reality to be lived. As if the woman who'd actually experienced those struggles was irrelevant to the narrative that had helped build David's career. That does sound inspiring. I managed. Absolutely. David's quite the success story. Scholarship to state, graduated summa cum laude, and now he's on track for partner. Jennifer says his background gives him a different perspective than some of the others. I thought about all the times David had called me to vent about work, about colleagues who didn't understand what it meant to worry about money, about the casual entitlement of people who'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. I'd listened to those conversations with pride, thinking that my struggles had given him empathy and wisdom that would serve him well. But apparently that wisdom was only valuable as long as its source remained invisible. Sarah checked her watch. "I should get back. If you see David's mother, could you let her know Jennifer's looking for her?" "I'll be sure to tell her," I said. After Sarah left, I stood alone in the bathroom again, but this time something had shifted. The hurt and confusion were still there, but they were being joined by something else. Anger, yes, but more than that. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a woman who'd been asked to leave her son's work party. I was a woman whose story was being used to advance her son's career while she herself was hidden away like a shameful secret. The sacrifices I'd made were valuable enough to impress potential partners, but the person who'd made them wasn't worthy of being seen. I checked my reflection one more time, straightened Patricia's borrowed dress, and made a decision. If David wanted to tell stories about his inspiring mother, then maybe it was time for that mother to actually make an appearance. I walked out of the bathroom and back into the ballroom, but this time I moved with purpose. I wasn't going to hide or apologize or allow myself to be shuffled away like an embarrassment. I'd earned the right to be proud of what I'd accomplished, and if David had forgotten that, perhaps it was time to remind him. The crowd had thinned slightly, but the energy in the room was still high. I spotted David near the bar, deep in conversation with the same silver-haired man I'd seen him with earlier. He looked relaxed now, probably assuming I'd taken his hint and left quietly. But I'd spent 30 years being quiet, being accommodating, being the kind of mother who didn't make waves or cause problems. And where had it gotten me? A son who loved me in private and denied me in public. I walked toward the registration table, where the young woman was still checking people in. She looked up with the same professional smile she'd given me earlier. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you tell me where I might find Jennifer?" I believe she wanted to meet David Morrison's mother. The woman's eyes lit up. "Oh, you're Mrs. Morrison. Yes, Jennifer mentioned she was hoping to meet you. She's right over there, the woman in the navy dress talking to the gentleman in the gray suit. I thanked her and walked toward Jennifer, my heart pounding but my steps steady. It was time to stop being the mother David was ashamed of and start being the mother I'd actually been. The one who'd worked 3 jobs and still managed to attend every school play. The one who'd learned to fix plumbing and change oil because there was no one else to do it. The one who'd raised a son to be successful and decent, even if he'd apparently forgotten the decent part. As I approached Jennifer, I could see David in my peripheral vision. He'd noticed my movement across the room, and his face had gone pale. He was probably calculating how quickly he could intercept me, how he could explain away my presence one more time. But I was done being explained away. "Jennifer?" I said, extending my hand to the woman in the navy dress. "I'm Linda Morrison, David's mother. I understand you wanted to meet me." The next few minutes would change everything between David and me, I knew that, but they would also reveal who we really were, stripped of the comfortable lies we'd been telling ourselves about our relationship. And maybe, just maybe, they would give us a chance to become something honest again. Jennifer's face brightened immediately, and her handshake was warm and firm. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so delighted to meet you. David has told me so much about you." Behind Jennifer, I could see David approaching quickly, his expression a mixture of panic and resignation. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at this woman who'd apparently been hearing stories about me while I was being hidden away like a family secret. "I hope they were good stories," I said with a smile that felt surprisingly genuine. "Oh, absolutely, your son is quite proud of you, you know. The way you raised him, the sacrifices you made for his education, it's truly inspiring." "Well," I said, glancing over Jennifer's shoulder to where David had stopped just within earshot, his face frozen, in an expression I couldn't quite read, "I'd be happy to tell you what that was really like." And for the first time all evening, I felt like myself again. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in David's professional world. Jennifer was genuinely interested in my story, asking thoughtful questions about the challenges of single parenthood and the sacrifices I'd made. As we talked, other people drifted into our conversation, drawn by Jennifer's obvious engagement and the novelty of meeting the woman behind the inspiring story they'd apparently heard before. David hovered at the edges of our group, his jaw tight and his eyes watchful. I could practically see him calculating the potential damage, wondering what embarrassing details I might reveal about our life. But as the conversation continued, something unexpected happened. The people around us weren't looking at me with pity or condescension. They were listening with respect, even admiration. "3 jobs," said a man named Robert, shaking his head in amazement. "And you still managed to attend all his school events?" "Most of them," I corrected. "I missed some things. But I tried to be there for the important moments." "That's incredible," said a woman whose jewelry probably cost more than my annual income. "I can barely manage my schedule with 1 job and full-time childcare." I found myself relaxing, telling stories I hadn't shared in years. About the time I'd shown up to David's middle school soccer game, still wearing my cleaning uniform because I'd come straight from work. About learning to help him with algebra by watching YouTube videos after he'd gone to bed. About the Christmas when money was so tight that I'd made his gifts instead of buying them, and how he'd proudly shown them off to his friends anyway. The David in these stories was the boy I remembered, the one who'd never seemed embarrassed by our circumstances, the one who'd helped me deliver altered clothes to customers, who'd eaten mac and cheese for dinner 3 nights in a row without complaint, who'd hugged me tight when I'd cried after missing his school play because I'd had to work a double shift. "He sounds like he was a wonderful child," Jennifer said warmly. "He was," I agreed, finally looking directly at David for the first time since the conversation had started. "He still is, in many ways." David's expression had changed during the course of our conversation. The panic had faded, replaced by something more complex. He was listening to his own story being told from my perspective, hearing about sacrifices he'd been too young to fully understand at the time. "David?" Jennifer called him over. "We were just talking about how you used to help your mother with her alterations business." He approached slowly, like someone walking toward the edge of a cliff. "That was a long time ago." "Not that long," I said gently. "You fixed my sewing machine just last year." Jennifer looked between us with obvious affection. "It's clear you two have a wonderful relationship. Family is so important, especially when you're building a career. It keeps you grounded." I watched David process this, the realization that his colleagues weren't judging him for his background, but rather admiring him for it. That the mother he'd been hiding was actually an asset rather than a liability in their eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, and there was something different in his voice, something that sounded like the boy I remembered. "I didn't know you were planning to come tonight." "I wanted to surprise you," I said, using the same words I'd used earlier but with a different energy now. "I wanted to see you being recognized for your achievements." Jennifer clapped her hands together. "Oh, you absolutely must stay for the awards ceremony. David's receiving the Rising Star Award tonight." "Is he?" I looked at my son with genuine pride. I had no idea. David's cheeks flushed, but this time it wasn't with embarrassment. "I wanted to tell you, but I thought you might not be interested in work stuff." The lie hung between us, gentle but still a lie. We both knew why he hadn't told me, why he'd created elaborate excuses to keep me away from his professional life. But standing there in that circle of his colleagues, seeing their respect for my story and their affection for him, the lie seemed smaller somehow, less insurmountable. "I'm always interested in your accomplishments," I said simply. The awards ceremony was beautiful. I sat at a table with Jennifer and her husband, watching David accept his award with a speech about perseverance and the importance of having strong foundations. He thanked his mentors, his colleagues, and his team. And then, looking directly at me for the first time all evening, he thanked his mother for teaching him that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. The applause was thunderous, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not because of the public recognition but because I could hear the boy I'd raised in his voice again, the one who'd been proud of our small apartment and our secondhand furniture because they represented everything we'd built together. After the ceremony, as people began to drift toward the exit, David approached my table. His colleagues had moved on to continue their conversations elsewhere, leaving us alone for the first time since I'd arrived. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain, "I owe you an apology." I looked at this man I'd raised, seeing both the successful professional he'd become and the confused boy he still was in some ways. "You do." He sat down beside me, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that took me back to every difficult conversation we'd ever had. "I was ashamed," he said finally. "Not of you, but of the difference between your life and mine. Between where I came from and where I am now. And you thought I didn't belong in your new world? I thought they wouldn't understand. I thought they'd look at you and see. I don't know. Poverty. Struggle. Things that would make them think less of me." I considered his words carefully. "And what do you think they saw instead?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Strength. Sacrifice. Love." He looked at me with eyes that held a new kind of understanding. "They saw all the things that made me who I am. The same things you've been running from." "Yeah." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I'm so sorry." I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he was scared, when he was hurt, when he was proud of some small achievement. "I know you are. How do we fix this?" I thought about all the times over the past few years when I'd felt like I was losing him, when his visits had become shorter and less frequent, when our conversations had grown more superficial. I thought about the walls he'd built between his old life and his new one, and how those walls had left me on the outside looking in. "We start by being honest," I said, "about who we are and where we came from, about the fact that your success doesn't erase our history, it celebrates it." David nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "I want to take you to dinner next week, somewhere nice. I want to introduce you to my girlfriend." I raised an eyebrow. "You have a girlfriend you haven't told me about?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Her name is Rachel. She's a teacher. She's been asking to meet you for months. And you've been making excuses." Yeah, but after tonight, after seeing how everyone responded to you. He shook his head. I've been an idiot, Mom. I squeezed his hand. You've been scared. There's a difference. As we sat there in the mostly empty ballroom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just love for my son, which had never wavered, but hope for our relationship. Hope that we could bridge the gap between the life we'd shared and the life he'd built. Hope that I could be part of his world without having to hide who I was or where I came from. The next week, David picked me up in his car for dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to before. Rachel was waiting for us at the table, a warm, genuine woman who hugged me like we were already family. Over the course of the evening, I learned that David had told her all about his childhood, about my work, about the sacrifices I'd made. But he'd also told her that I wouldn't fit in with his professional life, that I'd be uncomfortable in his world. I kept asking to meet you, Rachel told me over dessert. I couldn't understand why David was so protective about it. But after what he told me about the work party, I think I understand now. David looked uncomfortable. Rachel doesn't think I handled that very well. Because you didn't, Rachel said firmly but kindly. Your mother sounds amazing. I've been dying to meet the woman who raised such a good man. I looked across the table at my son, seeing him through Rachel's eyes. Despite his mistakes, despite his fear and confusion, he was a good man. The values I tried to instill in him were still there, even if they'd gotten buried under his anxiety about fitting into his new world. I think we're both still figuring out how to navigate this, I said. David's success is wonderful, but it's created some challenges we didn't expect. Over the following months, David and I slowly rebuilt our relationship on more honest ground. He started inviting me to more of his work events, introducing me without apology or explanation. He brought Rachel to my apartment for dinner, where she admired the quilt I'd made and the photos documenting David's childhood achievements. The most meaningful change, though, was in our regular conversations. David stopped editing his life for my consumption, talking openly about his work challenges and his goals. And I stopped pretending that I didn't notice the growing distance between us, addressing issues directly instead of swallowing my hurt. 6 months after the work party, David called me with exciting news. He'd been promoted to partner, the youngest person in the firm's history to achieve that distinction. The celebration dinner was the following weekend, and this time my invitation came with a request. I want you to sit at the head table with me, he said. Jennifer specifically asked that you be there. She says you're part of the Harrison & Associates family now. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months earlier, hiding in a hotel bathroom and listening to my son deny my existence. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd left behind in pursuit of something more honest and sustainable. I'd be honored, I told him. The night of the celebration, I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Not borrowed, not apologetic, but chosen to reflect the woman I actually was. Successful in my own right, proud of my accomplishments, and worthy of being seen. David picked me up personally, and as we walked into the hotel together, I felt the difference in how he carried himself. There was no longer any shame in our association, no hesitation in claiming me as his mother. Jennifer greeted us at the door with genuine warmth, and throughout the evening I was introduced not as David's mother, but as Linda Morrison, the woman who raised our newest partner. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. During his acceptance speech, David spoke about the importance of remembering your foundations and honoring the people who'd believed in you before anyone else did. He talked about his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through school, who'd taught him that dignity came from hard work, and that success meant lifting others up rather than leaving them behind. As he spoke, I realized that the story he was telling wasn't just about his past. It was about his values, his character, and his vision for the future. My sacrifices weren't just historical footnotes in his success story. They were the foundation of who he'd chosen to become. After the ceremony, as we stood together accepting congratulations from his colleagues, David leaned over and whispered in my ear. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said. "Thank you for showing up that night, even when I tried to send you away." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and nearly lost and found again, and felt a deep sense of completeness. Not because he'd achieved professional success, but because we'd found our way back to each other honestly. "Thank you for remembering who you are," I whispered back. Later that evening, as David drove me home through the city streets, I thought about the journey we'd taken together. From the small apartment where I'd raised him alone, to the boardroom where he'd just been named partner. From the night when he'd asked me to hide who I was, to the evening when he'd proudly claimed me as his foundation. It hadn't been easy, this process of growing up together. Because that's what it was. Not just David growing into his success, but both of us growing into a relationship that could encompass all the different versions of ourselves. The struggling single mother and the successful professional. The scared boy and the confident man. The family we'd been and the family we were becoming. "I love you, Mom," David said as he pulled into my driveway. "I love you too," I replied. "All of you. The successful consultant and the boy who used to help me with alterations. The partner at Harrison & Associates, and the kid who ate mac and cheese without complaining. All of it." He smiled, and in that moment, I saw every age he'd ever been reflected in his face. That's what I needed to hear. That you could love all of me, not just the parts that made you proud. "David," I said gently, "it all makes me proud. The success, yes, but also the struggle. The achievements, but also the journey. You don't have to choose between who you were and who you've become. They're all part of the same story." As I watched him drive away that night, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. We'd found our way through the complicated territory of family and success, of honoring the past while embracing the future. It hadn't required me to become someone different, or David to deny where he'd come from. It had simply required us to be honest about who we both were. The woman who'd hidden in a hotel bathroom 6 months earlier felt like someone from another lifetime. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who understood that her sacrifices had meaning beyond their utility in someone else's success story. A woman who'd raised a son to be better than his circumstances and had finally learned that being better didn't mean forgetting where you started. And maybe that was the real success story. Not David's partnership or my survival as a single mother, but our ability to grow together, to make mistakes and find forgiveness, to build something honest and lasting in a world that often rewarded pretense over authenticity. 6 months later, I received a call that would test everything we'd rebuilt together. David's voice was excited but nervous when he called to tell me the news. "Mom, Rachel and I are engaged." My heart swelled with happiness for them both. "Oh, David, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. We want to have the engagement party next month. A big celebration with both families, all our friends, everyone from work." He paused, and I could hear the old uncertainty creeping into his voice. "It's going to be fancy, Mom. Really fancy. Rachel's family has money, and they want to do this right." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Were we back to this? The fear that I wouldn't fit in, that my presence would somehow diminish his happiness? "David," I said carefully, "are you asking me not to come?" "No!" His response was immediate and fervent. "No, Mom, that's not what I'm saying at all. I want you there more than anyone. It's just..." He took a deep breath. "Rachel's parents are flying in from Connecticut. Her father owns a hedge fund. Her mother sits on charity boards. They're going to want to seat you at the family table, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with that." I realized then that his nervousness wasn't about hiding me. It was about protecting me. He'd learned to be proud of our story, but he was still worried about whether I'd feel out of place in yet another world where I didn't naturally belong. "David," I said gently, "I think I can handle sitting at a table with rich people. I've been practicing." He laughed, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I know you can. I just want everything to be perfect." "It will be perfect because it's about you and Rachel. The rest is just details." The engagement party was indeed fancy, held at an exclusive country club with manicured gardens and waitstaff who moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. Rachel's family was exactly as David had described, wealthy, polished, and intimidating in the way that people who'd never worried about money could be. But something had changed in how I approached these situations. Instead of focusing on what I lacked compared to the other guests, I focused on what I brought. I was the mother of the groom-to-be, the woman who'd raised the man Rachel had chosen to marry. That gave me a place at this table that had nothing to do with my bank account or my zip code. Rachel's mother, Catherine, was a surprisingly warm woman who seemed genuinely interested in hearing about David's childhood. We spent much of the evening swapping stories about our children, finding common ground in the universal experiences of motherhood, despite our very different circumstances. "David speaks about you with such love," Catherine told me as we watched our children dance together. "It's clear he gets his values from you." "Rachel seems to share those values," I replied. "You raised a lovely daughter." "We tried. But I have to admit, David's background gives him something our social circle sometimes lacks. He understands what it means to work for what you have." I looked at Catherine with new understanding. Wealth had its own challenges, its own fears about raising children who appreciated what they had. She wasn't looking down on my son's background. She was envying it. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with hedge fund managers and charity board members, holding my own in discussions about everything from education to economic policy. My years of struggle had given me perspectives these people found valuable, insights they couldn't get from their usual social circles. When David came to check on me halfway through the evening, I was deep in conversation with Rachel's father about workforce development programs. "Linda was just telling me about the challenges facing working mothers," he said to David. "We should discuss having her speak at our next foundation board meeting." David looked between us with amazement. "Really?" "Your mother has lived experiences that our board needs to hear about," Rachel's father continued. "Too often, we make policy decisions without understanding the real-world impact on the families we're trying to help." Later, as David and I stood together watching Rachel throw her bouquet to a crowd of eager young women, he shook his head in wonder. The weeks following the engagement party brought an unexpected shift in my relationship with David's professional world. What started as Rachel's father's casual suggestion about speaking to their foundation board turned into something much larger. Within a month, I received a formal invitation to address their quarterly meeting about the realities of economic mobility and workforce development. Standing in the boardroom of Steinberg Capital Management, looking out at 20 well-dressed philanthropists who controlled millions in charitable giving, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves. But this time, the anxiety wasn't about whether I belonged in the room. It was about whether I could do justice to the stories I'd been asked to tell. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel's father, Jonathan Steinberg, began, "I'd like you to meet Linda Morrison. Linda has first-hand experience with the challenges our workforce development programs are designed to address, and she's here today to help us understand whether our initiatives are actually reaching the people who need them most." As I stood to address the group, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been hiding in a bathroom, ashamed of my son's perception of me. Now I was being invited to share my expertise with people who had the power to impact thousands of lives. "Thank you for having me," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Jonathan asked me to talk about what it's really like to navigate poverty while trying to build a better life for your family. "I think the first thing you need to understand is that being poor isn't a character flaw. It's a circumstance, and circumstances can change if people have the right support and opportunities." I spent the next hour detailing my experiences with job training programs, childcare assistance, and educational support services. I talked about which programs had actually helped, and which had been bureaucratic obstacles that consumed time and energy without providing meaningful assistance. "The biggest barrier isn't lack of motivation," I explained. "It's lack of flexibility. When you're working multiple jobs to make ends meet, you can't attend training sessions that are only offered during business hours. When you're a single parent, you can't participate in programs that don't provide childcare. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford to take unpaid internships, even if they might lead to better opportunities." The questions that followed were thoughtful and engaged. These weren't people looking to feel good about their charitable giving. They were genuinely trying to understand how to make their programs more effective. A woman named Margaret Chen, who sat on several nonprofit boards, leaned forward with interest. "You mentioned that some programs were more helpful than others. What made the difference?" "The successful programs understood that poor people aren't stupid," I replied. They're often incredibly resourceful and hardworking. But they're operating within constraints that make traditional paths to advancement nearly impossible. The programs that worked met people where they were, instead of demanding that they conform to middle-class expectations. By the end of the meeting, I had been invited to consult on 3 different workforce development initiatives. The fee they offered for my consulting work was more than I typically made in 2 months at my current job. Driving home that afternoon, I called David to tell him about the meeting. "Mom, that's incredible," he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "But I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to be a big change." "What do you mean?" "Well, consulting work is different from what you're used to. It's project-based, sometimes unpredictable, and you'll be working with people from very different backgrounds." I heard something in his voice that concerned me. "David, are you worried that I can't handle this work?" There was a pause. "No, that's not what I'm worried about." "Then what?" Another pause, longer this time. "I guess I'm worried that you'll change, that this success will somehow make you different." I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, processing what he'd just said. After everything we'd been through, after all our conversations about accepting each other fully, he was still afraid that success would somehow corrupt me the way he felt it had corrupted him. "David," I said gently, "do you think I raised you to believe that success makes people bad?" "No, but do you think that your achievements have made you a worse person?" "Sometimes I wonder." His honesty took my breath away. Here was a man who had everything he'd worked for: professional recognition, financial security, a loving relationship. And he was still haunted by the fear that his success had somehow betrayed his values. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, "success didn't make you temporarily forget who you were. Fear did. Fear that you weren't really worthy of what you'd achieved. Fear that people would discover you were just pretending to belong in their world." Maybe you're right. I know I'm right. And I know that consulting work won't change who I am, any more than becoming a partner changed who you are at your core. We're still the same people who used to eat mac and cheese together and watch old movies on Friday nights. We just have more options now. That conversation marked another turning point in our relationship. David began to understand that my growing professional opportunities weren't a threat to our family dynamic, but rather an extension of the same values that had guided our lives together. I was still helping people navigate difficult circumstances. I was just doing it from a different position. Over the next several months, my consulting work expanded rapidly. Word spread through the philanthropic community about the woman who could bridge the gap between good intentions and effective implementation. I found myself speaking at conferences, advising nonprofit organizations, and serving on task forces addressing economic inequality. The work was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. It required me to translate my lived experiences into policy recommendations, to present complex social issues in ways that motivated action rather than just sympathy. But it was also deeply fulfilling. For the first time in my adult life, my struggles were being valued not just as obstacles I'd overcome, but as expertise that could help others. The financial impact was significant too. Within 6 months, I was earning more from consulting than I'd ever made from my combination of jobs. I was able to move out of my small apartment into a larger place in a better neighborhood. Not to impress anyone or to match some external standard of success, but simply because I could finally afford the kind of home I'd always wanted. David helped me move, and as we carried boxes into my new living room, I watched him take in the space with obvious pleasure. "This is really nice, Mom," he said, testing the stability of a bookshelf we'd just assembled. "You deserve this." "We both deserve good things," I replied. "Success isn't a zero-sum game. Your achievements don't diminish mine, and mine don't threaten yours." But even as I said it, I could see that David was still processing this new dynamic. For 30 years, he'd been the successful one in our family, the one whose achievements we celebrated and whose future we invested in. Now we were both succeeding in our respective fields, and he was learning to navigate what it meant to have a mother who was professionally accomplished in her own right. The test of this new balance came when David's firm decided to bid on a major consulting contract with the city's Department of Social Services. The project involved redesigning workforce development programs for low-income residents, exactly the kind of work I'd been doing with various nonprofits. "There's something I need to tell you," David said when he called to discuss the project. "My firm is considering bringing in an outside consultant to help with the community engagement piece. Someone with direct experience working with the target population." I immediately understood what he wasn't saying. "And you think they should hire me?" "I think you'd be perfect for it. But I also think it could be complicated, working together professionally." He was right to be concerned. The mother-son dynamic that had taken us years to rebuild could easily be disrupted by the introduction of professional hierarchy and competing interests. But I also knew that my expertise was exactly what his project needed. "What if we approach it differently?" I suggested. "What if you present my qualifications to your team without mentioning our relationship initially? Let them decide whether my experience and track record make me the right fit. If they choose me based on merit, then we can address the family connection." David was quiet for a moment. "That's actually a good idea. It removes any appearance of favoritism and lets your work speak for itself." "Exactly. And if they don't choose me, then you don't have to worry about managing family dynamics in the workplace." 3 weeks later, David called with news. The team reviewed 5 consulting proposals, and yours was their unanimous first choice. "When I told them you were my mother, they were shocked, but not because they thought it was inappropriate. They were amazed that I'd never mentioned having such an accomplished parent." Working together on the city project was a revelation for both of us. In the professional context, David was able to see me as a colleague and expert, rather than just as his mother. He watched me facilitate community meetings with confidence, present research findings to skeptical bureaucrats, and navigate the complex politics of municipal government. For my part, I got to witness David's professional skills firsthand. His ability to synthesize complex information, manage competing priorities, and build consensus among diverse stakeholders was impressive. I could see how the values I'd tried to instill in him, fairness, hard work, respect for others, translated into his professional approach. The project was ultimately successful, resulting in significant changes to the city's workforce development programs. The collaboration between David's firm and my consulting work became a model for how private and nonprofit sectors could partner effectively on social issues. But the real success was personal. Working together professionally had given us a new kind of respect for each other. David no longer saw me as someone he needed to protect or hide, and I no longer saw him as the only successful person in our family. We were partners, colleagues, 2 accomplished people who happened to also be mother and son. This shift in our dynamic had ripple effects throughout our extended relationship. Rachel began consulting me on education policy issues she was working on through her teaching position. David's colleagues started inviting me to their social events, not as David's mother, but as someone whose company they genuinely enjoyed. Most significantly, I began to understand that my worth wasn't tied to David's success or failure. For 30 years, I defined myself primarily as his mother, measuring my value by how well I'd raised him and how proud I could be of his achievements. Now I was discovering an identity that existed independently of our relationship, even as it was informed by the experiences we'd shared. The transformation wasn't without challenges. There were moments when David struggled with having a mother who was professionally prominent in overlapping circles. There were times when I had to consciously resist the urge to give him unsolicited advice about his career. We both had to learn new boundaries around our professional and personal relationships. One evening, about 8 months after I'd started consulting work, David came over for our weekly dinner looking unusually stressed. "Bad day?" I asked as I served the pasta I'd made. "Complicated day," he replied. "I ran into a problem with the Henderson project, and my first instinct was to call you for advice. But then I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk to you as my mother or as a professional colleague." I set down my fork and looked at him carefully. "What's the difference?" "Well, as my mother, you'd probably tell me I'm being too hard on myself and that everything will work out fine. As a colleague, you might have specific suggestions about how to handle the situation. And which do you need right now?" David thought about it for a moment. "I guess I need both. I need someone who believes in me unconditionally, but I also need someone who can help me think through the problem strategically." "Then you're in luck," I said with a smile, "because you happen to know someone who is both of those things." We spent the next hour discussing his work challenges, with me shifting fluidly between offering emotional support and professional guidance. It was a new kind of conversation for us, one that acknowledged both our personal bond and our professional respect for each other. As David prepared to leave that evening, he paused at the door. "You know, Mom, I think I'm finally understanding what you meant about success not changing who we are." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're still the same person who used to help me with my homework and listen to me complain about my problems. But now you're also this accomplished consultant who speaks at conferences and advises city officials. Both versions of you are real, and they don't contradict each other. Just like you're still the boy who used to help me deliver alterations, even though you're now a successful partner at a prestigious firm." "Exactly. I guess I thought success meant leaving parts of yourself behind. But maybe it means integrating all the parts into something bigger." After he left, I sat in my new living room thinking about the journey we'd taken together. We'd started as a struggling single mother and her son, bound together by necessity and love. We'd grown into two successful professionals who happened to be family, connected by choice and mutual respect. The change hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been moments of confusion, hurt feelings, and misunderstandings. But we'd worked through them by being honest about our fears and expectations, by being willing to see each other as complex people rather than simple roles. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years earlier, cleaning office buildings at night and feeling invisible in most social situations. That woman was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. Her experiences had become the foundation for expertise that was valued and sought after. Her struggles had given her insights that could help others navigate similar challenges. Similarly, David was still the boy I'd raised, but he was no longer constrained by the insecurities that had once made him ashamed of our shared history. He'd learned that his background was a source of strength rather than something to overcome. The next month brought an opportunity that would test everything we'd learned about balancing our personal and professional relationships. I was invited to give the keynote address at the annual conference of the National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. The audience would include people from across the country who were working on the same issues I'd been addressing locally. When I told David about the invitation, his response surprised me. "I think I'd like to attend the conference," he said. "Not to support you, though of course I want to do that, but because the work they're discussing is relevant to some of the projects my firm is considering." "You want to attend as a professional, not as my son." "I want to attend as both." "Is that possible?" I thought about his question seriously. Could we navigate a professional conference, where I was the featured speaker and he was an attendee, without falling into old patterns of relationship dynamics? "I think it's possible," I said finally, "but we'll need to be clear about boundaries. When I'm speaking or networking professionally, I'm not your mother in that moment. I'm a colleague. And when you're attending sessions or meeting potential clients, you're not my son. You're a professional pursuing your own interests." "That makes sense. But what about when we're having dinner together or talking between sessions?" "Then we're family again. The key is being intentional about which role we're in at any given moment." The conference was held in Chicago, and we flew there together but stayed in separate hotels. I needed space to prepare for my keynote, and David wanted the freedom to network without worrying about how his presence might affect my professional interactions. The night before my speech, we met for dinner at a restaurant near the conference center. I was nervous about the presentation, not because I doubted my expertise, but because the audience would include people whose work I'd been following for years. "You know," David said over appetizers, "I've been thinking about your speech tomorrow. About what you're going to tell them." "Oh, any suggestions?" "Actually, yes. I think you should tell them about us. About how our relationship has evolved as we've both become more professionally successful." I looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because workforce development isn't just about helping people get jobs. It's about helping entire families navigate social mobility. Your story with me illustrates some of the challenges that come with success, especially when family members are at different stages of that journey." He was right. The story of our relationship over the past 2 years was actually a case study in the complex dynamics of economic advancement. It showed how success could strain family relationships if not handled thoughtfully, but also how those relationships could evolve to become sources of mutual support and professional collaboration. Are you comfortable with me sharing details about your struggles with our relationship? I asked. I think it's important. Other families are probably dealing with similar issues. If our experience can help them navigate those challenges more successfully, then it's worth the vulnerability. The next morning, I stood before an audience of 500 workforce development professionals and told them a story I'd never shared publicly before. I talked about raising David as a single mother, about the sacrifices I'd made to ensure his success, and about how that success had initially created distance between us. I described the night at his work party when he'd asked me to leave, the hurt and confusion I'd felt, and the gradual process of rebuilding our relationship on more honest ground. I talked about how my own professional development had changed our family dynamic, creating new opportunities for mutual respect and collaboration. The point isn't that success is bad or that family relationships should never change, I concluded. The point is that we need to support entire family systems as they navigate economic mobility, not just individuals. When one person in a family achieves success, it affects everyone in that system. Our programs need to account for those dynamics. The response was overwhelming. During the question and answer session, person after person shared similar stories from their own families or from clients they'd worked with. The workshop sessions that followed my keynote were filled with discussions about how to incorporate family systems thinking into workforce development programs. David attended several of those sessions, contributing insights from his own experience and from his firm's work with corporate clients. Watching him participate in those discussions, I felt a deep sense of pride. Not just because he was my son, but because he was a thoughtful professional who brought valuable perspectives to important conversations. That evening, the conference organizers hosted a reception for speakers and VIP attendees. David and I found ourselves in conversations with different groups of people, sometimes together and sometimes separately. At one point, I was talking with a program director from Detroit when she mentioned that her organization was looking for consulting support on a new initiative. You should talk to David Morrison, I said, pointing across the room to where David was deep in conversation with several other attendees. He's with Harrison and Associates, and they do excellent work on public-private partnerships. Morrison? She said with interest. Are you related? He's my son, but more importantly for your purposes. He's a very skilled consultant who understands how to bridge the gap between corporate and nonprofit perspectives. She looked between David and me with obvious admiration. A family business? Not exactly. We both happen to end up working in related fields. It's been wonderful being able to collaborate professionally while maintaining our personal relationship. Later that evening, as David and I walked back to our hotels, he was quiet and thoughtful. Penny for your thoughts, I said. I was just thinking about how natural that felt today, moving between talking to you as a colleague and as my mother. A year ago, I would have been stressed about managing those different roles. Today, it just felt easy. Practice makes perfect, I said. We've had a lot of opportunities to work on it. No, I think it's more than that. I think we've both become more comfortable with being complex people. You're not just my mother, and I'm not just your son. We're both professionals, both experts in our fields, both people with multiple facets to our identities. He was right. The growth we'd experienced hadn't just been about learning to balance our personal and professional relationships. It had been about accepting ourselves as multifaceted people who couldn't be reduced to simple categories or roles. As we reached my hotel, David gave me a hug that felt different from the ones we'd shared in the past. It wasn't the hug of a son seeking comfort from his mother, or of a mother protecting her child. It was the hug of two equals who respected and loved each other, who had built something meaningful together both personally and professionally. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said. For the speech today, for the work you're doing, for how you've handled all the changes in our relationship. I'm proud of you too, I replied. For being brave enough to let our relationship evolve. For supporting my professional development even when it felt threatening. For becoming the kind of man who can admit when he's made mistakes. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how far we'd come from that painful evening at the work party. We'd transformed a relationship based on traditional roles and unspoken expectations into something much more dynamic and sustainable. We'd learned to see each other as whole people rather than simple categories, and in doing so, we'd discovered new ways to support and challenge each other. The next morning brought another surprise. Over breakfast, David told me that several people from the conference had approached him about potential consulting opportunities. His participation in the workforce development discussions had impressed attendees who were looking for corporate partners on their initiatives. "It's ironic," he said over coffee. "A year ago, I was worried that my connection to you would hurt my professional reputation. Now it's opening doors I didn't even know existed." "That's what happens when you stop trying to hide who you are," I said. "People respond to authenticity, even in professional contexts. I think I'm finally understanding that. But I have to admit, it's still an adjustment. I spent so many years thinking that success meant leaving parts of yourself behind. And now? Now I think success means integrating all parts of yourself into something coherent and honest. It means being proud of where you came from while still growing into who you're becoming." As we finished breakfast and prepared to head to the airport, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just about the success of the conference or the professional opportunities it had created, but about the relationship David and I had built together. We'd taken something that was broken and rebuilt it into something stronger and more flexible than it had been before. The flight home gave us time to process everything that had happened over the past few days. We talked about the sessions we'd attended, the people we'd met, and the potential collaborations that might develop from the conference. But we also talked about our family, about how the changes in our relationship had affected not just us but also Rachel and the other people in our lives. David mentioned that Rachel had been inspired by watching our relationship evolve, that it had given her ideas about how to support her own students as they navigated social mobility. "She's been thinking about going back to school," David said, "getting a master's in social work so she can do more direct service work with families." "That's wonderful. Will you be supportive if she decides to do that?" "Absolutely. I've learned a lot about supporting the people you love as they pursue their own growth." As our plane descended toward home, I looked out the window at the city where I'd raised David, where I'd struggled and succeeded and failed and tried again. It looked the same as it always had, but everything else had changed. I was returning as a different person than I'd been when I left, not because of anything that had happened at the conference, but because of the ongoing process of growth and change that had been transforming my life for the past 2 years. David and I said goodbye at the airport, planning to meet for dinner later in the week to continue processing our conference experience. As I drove home to my new apartment, I thought about the trajectory of our relationship and where it might go from here. We'd solved the immediate problems that had brought us to crisis 2 years earlier. David was no longer ashamed of our shared history, and I was no longer financially dependent on his success or emotionally dependent on his approval. We had built a relationship based on mutual respect rather than traditional roles. But I also knew that relationships are living things that require constant attention and adjustment. New challenges would arise as our lives continued to evolve. Rachel would become more central to our family dynamic when she and David married. I might decide to expand my consulting work in ways that would require different kinds of support from David. He might face professional challenges that would test his commitment to maintaining authentic relationships. The key would be remembering what we'd learned about communication, honesty, and the importance of seeing each other as complete people rather than simple roles. We'd built a foundation that could support continued growth and change, but we'd need to keep working at it. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door working in her garden. She waved and came over to welcome me back from my trip. "How was Chicago?" she asked. "Wonderful. I gave a speech at a conference there." "A speech? How exciting. What about?" "Workforce development. Helping people find good jobs and build better lives for their families." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "That sounds like important work. I'm sure you did a wonderful job." As we chatted about the conference and my trip, I realized that this conversation would have been impossible 2 years earlier. Not because Mrs. Henderson wasn't friendly, but because I wouldn't have had anything interesting to share. My life had been constrained by routine and financial worry, with few opportunities for growth or recognition. Now I was someone who traveled to conferences, who gave speeches to professional audiences, who had expertise that people valued. But I was also still someone who lived in this neighborhood, who cared about her neighbors, who had deep roots in this community. That integration of past and present, of different aspects of my identity, of personal and professional success, felt like the real achievement. Not the consulting contracts or the speaking engagements, important as those were, but the ability to grow without losing myself, to succeed without abandoning my values or my relationships. That evening, I called David to thank him for suggesting that I include our family story in my keynote speech. It was the right thing to do, he said, and it made the presentation much more powerful. People connected with it in a way they wouldn't have with just the policy stuff. I've been thinking about what you said at breakfast. About success meaning integration rather than leaving parts of yourself behind. What about it? I think that's what we've both learned to do. We've figured out how to honor our past while embracing our future, how to maintain our relationship while allowing it to grow and change. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's going to serve us well as our lives continue to evolve. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about the future. There would be new challenges and opportunities, new ways that our relationship would need to adapt and grow. But I felt confident now in our ability to navigate those changes together. The woman who had hidden in a hotel bathroom 2 years earlier, ashamed and confused about her place in her son's life, felt like someone from another lifetime. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had built a meaningful career, and who had created an honest, respectful relationship with her son that could weather whatever changes lay ahead. And maybe that was the most important transformation of all, not just becoming successful, but becoming someone who could sustain success while maintaining the relationships and values that truly mattered. 2 years had passed since the conference in Chicago, and my consulting practice had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. What started as occasional speaking engagements had evolved into a full-scale business with clients across 3 states. I'd hired 2 associates, rented office space in downtown, and established myself as a recognized authority on workforce development and economic mobility. But success at this level brought complications I hadn't anticipated. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, while I was reviewing proposals for a new federal contract. Linda, this is Margaret Chen from the Steinberg Foundation. I hope you remember me from the board meeting where you first spoke. Of course, Margaret, how can I help you? I'm calling with an extraordinary opportunity. The Department of Labor is launching a national initiative on family-centered workforce development, based largely on the research and advocacy work you've been doing. They want you to head up the program. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Head up the program? It would mean relocating to Washington, D.C. for at least 3 years. You'd be overseeing a budget of $50 million and working directly with the Secretary of Labor. Linda, this is the kind of position that could reshape national policy on these issues. After Margaret hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline. Washington, D.C. A federal appointment. The chance to impact workforce development policy at the national level. It was everything I'd worked toward, the logical next step in a career that had already exceeded my wildest expectations. But it was also 3,000 miles away from David. I called him that evening, after spending the day researching the position and trying to sort through my conflicting emotions. "Mom, that's incredible," he said when I finished explaining the opportunity. "The Department of Labor. Do you realize what this means?" "I think so. But David, it would mean leaving. Leaving you, leaving Rachel, leaving the life we've built here." There was a pause. "Mom, you can't turn down an opportunity like this because of me." "I'm not turning it down because of you. I'm considering all the factors, including the fact that my family is here. But this is your career. This is everything you've worked for." I heard something in his voice that concerned me. "David, are you trying to get rid of me?" "What? No, of course not. I just don't want you to limit yourself because of family obligations." "Is that what you think our relationship is? An obligation?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, can we talk about this in person?" "I think this conversation is too important for the phone." We met for lunch the next day at a quiet restaurant downtown. David looked tired, and I could see the stress lines around his eyes that always appeared when he was wrestling with something difficult. "Talk to me," I said after we'd ordered. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about family obligations, and I realize that I'm terrified of becoming the reason you don't pursue this opportunity." "Why?" "Because of our history. Because of how long it took us to build a healthy relationship. I don't want to go back to being the person whose needs come before your growth." I studied my son's face, seeing the boy who used to worry about being too much trouble, who used to apologize for needing things. "David, you were a child then. Children's needs are supposed to come before their parents' career ambitions. That's how families work. But you sacrificed so much. You gave up opportunities. You worked jobs that were beneath your capabilities. You put your own dreams on hold. I can't be responsible for that happening again. And I can't make major life decisions based on what you think I should do. That's not healthy either." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about a job opportunity. It was about the ongoing challenge of maintaining a relationship between two independent adults who also happened to be mother and son. "What do you want to do?" David asked. Finally. "I don't know yet. It's an amazing opportunity, but it's also a huge change. I'd be starting over in a new city, learning a new bureaucracy, working with people I don't know." "Those are all things you've done before." "True, but I've never done them at this level, with this much responsibility." David leaned forward. "Mom, can I ask you something? Are you hesitating because you're genuinely unsure about the opportunity? Or because you're afraid of what leaving might do to our relationship?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding asking myself directly. Both, I think. What if we could figure out a way to maintain our relationship, even if you're in DC? What if distance doesn't have to mean disconnection? "Is that what you want? For me to take the job? I want you to make the decision that's right for you, without worrying about managing my feelings about it." Over the next week, I found myself wrestling with questions I'd never had to consider before. For 30 years, my major life decisions had been filtered through the lens of what was best for David. Where to live, what jobs to take, how to spend my time and money. Everything had been evaluated based on its impact on his well-being and our relationship. Now, for the first time, I was facing a decision that was purely about my own professional growth and personal fulfillment. The weight of that freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I called Rachel, hoping for a different perspective on the situation. "Linda, I think you should take it," she said without hesitation. "This is the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime." "But what about you and David? What about our family?" "We're not going anywhere. Washington, D.C. isn't Mars. We can visit, you can come home for holidays, we can video chat regularly. Families adapt to these kinds of changes all the time. David seems to think I should take it too. Sometimes I wonder if he's relieved at the prospect of having some distance from me." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Linda, can I tell you something David probably won't?" "Of course." "He's been struggling lately with figuring out how to be supportive of your success without being overshadowed by it. Having a mother who's becoming nationally prominent in her field is wonderful, but it's also complicated. He's proud of you, but he's also trying to establish his own professional identity. I had no idea he was feeling that way. He wouldn't want you to know. He doesn't want his struggles to influence your decisions. But I think some distance might actually be good for both of you. It would give you both space to grow independently while maintaining your connection." That conversation shifted my thinking in ways I hadn't expected. I'd been so focused on whether leaving would damage our relationship that I hadn't considered whether staying might be limiting both of us. I spent the weekend driving around the city, visiting places that had been important in my life with David. The apartment complex where we'd lived when he was small, the high school where I'd attended his graduation, the restaurant where we'd celebrated his first job offer. Each location held memories that had shaped us both, but they were memories of the past, not necessarily predictors of the future. On Sunday evening, I called Margaret Chen back. "I'd like to know more about the position," I said. "When would I need to start? What would the transition look like? And is there any flexibility in terms of the time commitment?" "The position would start in September, so you'd have 6 months to wrap up your current commitments. It's initially a 3-year appointment, but there would be opportunities for extension if things go well. And yes, there's some flexibility in terms of travel and remote work, especially after you've established yourself in the role. 6 months. That would give me time to transition my current clients, help my associates take on more responsibility, and prepare David and Rachel for the change. It would also give me time to process my own feelings about this major life transition. I'd like to visit DC and meet with the team before making a final decision. Of course, I'll arrange for you to spend a few days there next month. You can tour the facilities, meet your potential colleagues, and get a better sense of what the role would entail. After I hung up, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This conversation had made the opportunity feel real in a way it hadn't before. I wasn't just considering an abstract possibility anymore. I was actively exploring a concrete next step in my career. I called David to update him on the conversation. "How are you feeling about it?" he asked. "Nervous, excited, overwhelmed, all of the above." That sounds about right for a major life decision. "David, can I ask you something, and will you give me an honest answer?" "Always." "Do you think I'm capable of doing this job? At this level? With this much responsibility?" There was no hesitation in his response. "Mom, I think you're one of the most capable people I know. You've been preparing for this kind of role your entire career, even when you didn't know it. Your lived experience, your consulting work, your ability to translate complex issues into actionable policy, it's all been leading to this. Even if it means moving away from family?" Even then, "Mom, successful people sometimes have to make difficult choices about where to live and how to structure their lives. That doesn't make them bad people or bad family members. It makes them human." The trip to Washington, D.C. was scheduled for April. I flew out on a Thursday morning, nervous but determined to approach the visit with an open mind. The Department of Labor building was imposing in the way that federal buildings always are, but the people I met were surprisingly warm and approachable. Dr. Sarah Williams, who would be my immediate supervisor, gave me a tour of the offices and introduced me to the team I'd be working with. They were accomplished professionals from diverse backgrounds, all passionate about the work they were doing. "We've been following your consulting work for the past year," Dr. Williams said as we sat in her office overlooking the National Mall. "Your approach to family-centered workforce development is exactly what this initiative needs. We want someone who understands these issues from the ground up, not just from an academic or policy perspective." Over the next 2 days, I attended meetings, reviewed program documents, and participated in strategy sessions. The work was challenging and complex, involving coordination between multiple federal agencies, state governments, and local organizations. But it was also exactly the kind of systemic change work I'd been advocating for throughout my consulting career. On my last evening in D.C., I had dinner with Margaret Chen, who had flown in from New York to check on my progress. "So what do you think?" she asked over dessert. "I think it's an incredible opportunity. The work is important, the team is impressive, and the potential for impact is enormous. But it's also terrifying. I've spent my entire adult life in one city, building a life and relationships there. Moving here would mean starting over in many ways." Starting over? Or expanding? "You wouldn't be abandoning your previous life, Linda. You'd be building on it. My son thinks I should take it. My future daughter-in-law thinks I should take it. Everyone I've talked to thinks I should take it. But you're still hesitant. I keep thinking about what it means to be successful at this stage of life. Is it about achieving the highest possible position, or is it about finding balance and contentment with what you've already built?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering my question. "You know, I've been in the nonprofit world for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people wrestle with these kinds of decisions. The ones who seem happiest are the ones who make choices based on their values, rather than external expectations. What are your values when it comes to work and family?" "I value making a difference, continuing to grow professionally, and maintaining meaningful relationships. The question is whether this opportunity supports all of those values or conflicts with some of them. And what do you think?" "I think you could make a significant difference in this role, more than you could in any other position available to you right now. I think it would represent enormous professional growth. And I think your family relationships are strong enough to weather this kind of change." Flying back home, I found myself thinking not just about the immediate decision, but about the arc of my life and career. 40 years ago, I'd been a young single mother with limited options and big dreams for my son. 20 years ago, I'd been a struggling worker trying to balance multiple jobs and parental responsibilities. 5 years ago, I'd been someone who cleaned office buildings and felt invisible in most professional settings. Now I was being offered a federal appointment that would make me one of the most influential people in my field. The trajectory was almost too dramatic to believe, except that I'd lived every step of it. When I got home, David was waiting in my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. "I thought you might be tired from traveling," he said, "and I wanted to hear about your trip." As we ate, I described everything I'd seen and learned in DC. David listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the scope of the work and the team I'd be joining. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," he said when I finished. "It is. But David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Are you pushing me to take this job because you think it's right for me, or because you want me to leave?" David set down his fork and looked at me seriously. "Mom, I would never want you to leave, because I don't want you around. Our relationship means everything to me. But I do think some distance might be healthy for both of us. Not because I don't love you, but because I think we've both become a little too invested in managing each other's feelings and decisions." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I find myself making career decisions based partly on how they'll affect you, and I think you do the same thing with me. That's not necessarily bad, but it might be limiting both of us." I thought about his words, recognizing the truth in them. Since we'd rebuilt our relationship, we'd perhaps swung too far in the direction of considering each other's feelings in every decision. "So you think taking this job would be good for our relationship?" "I think it would force us both to become more independent while maintaining our connection. We'd have to be more intentional about our relationship instead of taking it for granted." That night, I lay awake thinking about everything David had said. He was right that we'd become very enmeshed in each other's lives since resolving our previous conflicts. We talked almost daily, consulted each other on major decisions, and structured our social lives partly around each other's schedules. While that closeness had been healing after our period of estrangement, it might now be preventing both of us from fully embracing our individual growth and independence. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Dr. Williams and accepted the position. "I'm thrilled," she said. "When can you start?" "September 1st, as we discussed. I'll need the summer to transition my current commitments and prepare for the move." "Perfect. I'll have HR send you all the paperwork and logistics information." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a few minutes processing what I'd just committed to. In 5 months, I would be leaving everything familiar to start a new chapter of my life in a new city, working at a level of responsibility I'd never experienced before. The feeling was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. I called David next. "I took the job," I said when he answered. "Mom, that's fantastic. How are you feeling?" "Scared." "Excited." "Like I might throw up." David laughed. "That sounds about right for a major life change. I'm so proud of you." "Are you really okay with this? With me moving away?" "I'm more than okay with it. I think this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing right now." Over the next few months, the logistics of my transition kept me busy enough that I didn't have much time to second-guess my decision. I worked with my associates to transfer my current clients, helped them establish their own consulting practices, and gradually wound down my local commitments. David and Rachel were incredibly supportive throughout the process. They helped me apartment hunt in DC via video calls, researched neighborhoods, and even flew out with me for a weekend to look at potential places to live. The apartment I eventually chose was in a neighborhood called DuPont Circle, within walking distance of the metro and close to several parks. It was smaller than my current place but had beautiful hardwood floors and large windows that filled the space with natural light. "It's perfect for you," Rachel said as we toured the space. "Close enough to work that you won't have a terrible commute, but far enough from the federal buildings that you'll feel like you're living in a real neighborhood." As September approached, I found myself cycling through different emotions almost daily. Some days I was confident and excited about the new challenge. Other days I was convinced I'd made a terrible mistake and would fail spectacularly in such a high-profile role. David seemed to sense my anxiety during our weekly dinners. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked one evening in August. "More like fifth and sixth thoughts. David, what if I'm not qualified for this? What if I get there and realize I'm in over my head? Mom, do you remember when I started at Harrison & Associates? I called you almost every night for the first 2 months, convinced they were going to figure out that I didn't belong there. I remember. I told you that imposter syndrome was normal and that you'd earned your place there. Right. So let me tell you the same thing. You've earned this opportunity through years of hard work and demonstrated expertise. The people who hired you know what they're doing, and they wouldn't have chosen you if they didn't think you could succeed. But this is different. This is the federal government. This is national policy. And you're someone who understands these issues better than almost anyone in the country. Mom, you've lived the problems these policies are trying to solve. You've worked with the programs they're trying to improve. You've seen what works and what doesn't from every possible angle." His confidence in me was both reassuring and humbling. This was the same person who had once been ashamed to introduce me to his colleagues, now serving as my strongest advocate and supporter. The going-away party my colleagues organized was both celebration and wake. I was excited about my new opportunity, but I was also grieving the end of a chapter of my life that had been deeply meaningful. My former cleaning supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, came to the party, along with several of the other women I'd worked with during my years in building maintenance. Seeing them there, celebrating my success, brought tears to my eyes. "I always knew you were too smart for that job," Mrs. Rodriguez said, hugging me tightly. "But I'm glad you did it anyway, because it made you understand what the rest of us go through." That comment crystallized something important for me. My years of struggle hadn't just been preparation for future success. They'd been education that would inform everything I did going forward. The woman who had worked multiple jobs to support her son would never lose sight of what life was like for families facing those same challenges. My last dinner with David and Rachel before leaving was emotional for all of us. We went to the restaurant where we'd had our first meal together as a reconstituted family, the place where David had apologized for his behavior at the work party. "It feels like everything has come full circle," Rachel observed. "From that night when your relationship was broken, to tonight when you're both supporting each other's growth and independence." "Not full circle," David corrected. "More like a spiral. We're back to a similar place geographically, but we're completely different people than we were then." He was right. The woman leaving for DC was not the same person who had hidden in a hotel bathroom 3 years earlier, and the man supporting her decision was not the same person who had asked his mother to leave his work party. "I'm going to miss you both terribly," I said, fighting back tears. "But I'm also excited about this next chapter." "We'll visit," Rachel promised. "DC is only a 5-hour drive. We can come down for weekends, and you can come home whenever you want." "And besides," David added, "you're not disappearing. You're just expanding the geographic scope of your influence." Moving day arrived with typical September weather: hot, humid, and threatening rain. David took the day off work to help me load the moving truck and drive with me to DC. It was a long, emotional day, but having him there made the transition feel more manageable. As we carried boxes into my new apartment, I was struck by how different this felt from any previous move I'd made. This wasn't a move driven by financial necessity or family obligations. This was a choice I'd made based on my own professional goals and personal growth. "It's a good space," David said, setting down a box of books in what would become my home office. "I can see you being happy here." "I hope so. I'm still terrified about starting the job, but I'm not terrified about the move anymore." "Why not?" "Because this feels right. Scary, but right." David stayed for the weekend, helping me unpack and get settled. We explored the neighborhood together, found the nearest grocery store and coffee shop, and established some basic routines for my new life. On Sunday evening, as he prepared to drive back home, we stood on the steps of my new building saying goodbye. "This isn't goodbye," he said, hugging me tightly. "This is just, see you soon." I know, but it still feels like the end of something. It's the end of one phase of our relationship, but it's the beginning of another one. Mom, I think this is going to be good for both of us. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness at the physical separation, excitement about my new job, anxiety about the challenges ahead, and deep gratitude for the relationship we'd built together. The first few weeks in DC were overwhelming in the way that all major transitions are: learning new systems, meeting new colleagues, navigating federal bureaucracy. Everything required more mental energy than I'd anticipated. But gradually, I began to find my footing. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. I was finally in a position to influence policy at the scale I'd always dreamed of, working on initiatives that could impact millions of families across the country. My colleagues were impressive and welcoming, treating me as an equal despite my unconventional background. Dr. Williams became not just a supervisor but a mentor, helping me navigate the political aspects of federal employment while protecting my ability to focus on the substantive work. David and I talked every few days, but our conversations had a different quality than they'd had when I lived locally. We were both more selective about what we shared, more intentional about the time we spent together, even virtually. "How's the job going?" he asked during one of our evening calls. "Better than I expected. The learning curve is steep, but I'm starting to feel like I know what I'm doing." "And how's DC? Are you settling in?" "I think so. I joined a book club in my neighborhood, and I've been exploring the museums on weekends. It's different from home, but it's starting to feel familiar." "I'm proud of you, Mom, for taking the leap, for adapting so well to such a big change." "Thank you. How are things with you? How's work?" "Good. Really good, actually. I've been taking on some projects I might not have considered before, things that require more travel and time commitment." "Because you have more flexibility now?" "Partly, but also because I'm not worrying as much about how my choices affect other people. I'm making decisions based more on what I want professionally." This was exactly what we'd hoped would happen. The physical distance was giving us both space to make choices based on our own priorities, rather than constantly considering the impact on our relationship. 6 months into my new job, I received news that would test our evolved relationship in unexpected ways. Rachel called me on a Thursday evening, her voice excited but nervous. "Linda, I have something to tell you. David and I are engaged." "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." "We wanted to tell you in person, but we couldn't wait. We're thinking about a summer wedding, probably in June." After I hung up, I realized that this was the first major family milestone I would experience as someone living far away. I wouldn't be involved in the day-to-day wedding planning, wouldn't be able to help with dress shopping or venue visits, wouldn't be present for all the small moments that had always been such an important part of our family life. But instead of feeling excluded or sad, I found myself looking forward to playing a different kind of role. I could be the person they called for advice, the one who offered perspective from a distance, the mother of the groom who brought calm wisdom to what would undoubtedly be a stressful planning process. When I flew home for Rachel's bridal shower 2 months later, I was struck by how natural it felt to slip back into family life temporarily while maintaining my new sense of independence. "You seem different," Rachel observed as we addressed wedding invitations together. "Different how? More confident, maybe? More settled in yourself? Like you know exactly who you are and what you're doing." "I think I do, for the first time in my adult life. It's taken me 60 years to figure out who I am when I'm not defined primarily by being David's mother." "But you're still David's mother." "Absolutely. But I'm also other things. And those other things make me a better mother, because they make me a more complete person." The wedding itself was beautiful, a perfect blend of elegance and warmth that reflected both David and Rachel's personalities. I played the traditional mother of the groom role, giving a speech about watching David grow from a boy into a man and welcoming Rachel into our family. But I also felt like I was experiencing the event as my own person, not just as someone fulfilling a family obligation. I enjoyed conversations with other wedding guests about my work in DC, spent time with old friends who were curious about my new life, and found myself explaining to people how fulfilling it was to work at this level of policy influence. During the father-daughter dance, David came over and asked me to dance. "How are you feeling about everything?" he asked as we moved slowly around the dance floor. "Grateful. Happy for you and Rachel. Proud of the life you've built together. Any regrets about missing out on the day-to-day wedding planning? None. I think this worked out exactly as it should have. You and Rachel got to plan your wedding without managing my opinions and emotions, and I got to show up and celebrate without feeling responsible for every detail. I think you're right. And Mom? Thank you for taking that job in DC. I know it was scary, but I think it was exactly what we all needed. As the evening wound down and I prepared to fly back to DC the next morning, I reflected on how much our family dynamic had evolved. We were still close, still supportive of each other, still invested in each other's happiness, but we were also independent, secure in our own identities, able to come together and separate as needed without threatening the fundamental bond between us. The flight back to DC felt like coming home in a way that surprised me. Over the past year, I'd built a life there that was entirely my own, separate from my history as David's mother, but informed by everything I'd learned in that role. A year later, I received a call that would bring everything full circle. Dr. Williams had been promoted to Deputy Secretary of Labor, and she wanted me to apply for her position as head of the Workforce Development Division. It would mean a significant increase in responsibility, she explained. You'd be overseeing all of our workforce programs, managing a budget of over $200 million, and working directly with the Secretary on policy development. Dr. Williams, I appreciate your confidence in me, but are you sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility? Linda, you've exceeded every expectation we had when we hired you. Your programs have become models for the entire country. You've built relationships with stakeholders across the political spectrum. You're exactly what we need in this role. That evening, I called David to discuss the opportunity. Mom, that's incredible. You'd basically be the most powerful person in workforce development in the entire country. I know, it's overwhelming. Are you going to apply? I think so. But David, I want you to know that your opinion matters to me, even though I'm not going to make my decision based on what you think I should do. I appreciate that distinction. And for what it's worth, I think you should absolutely apply. This is what you've been working toward your entire career. What if I get it and fail spectacularly? Then you'll fail spectacularly in one of the most important jobs in government, doing work that you care deeply about. There are worse ways to fail. His response made me laugh. When did you become so wise about career risks? I learned from watching you. You've shown me that the biggest risk is not taking risks when they align with your values and goals. I applied for the promotion and was selected after a rigorous interview process. The announcement made national news, with several articles describing my journey from single mother working multiple jobs to top federal official. David sent me a text message the day the appointment was announced. Saw the news coverage. I hope they mentioned that you're also an excellent mother who makes amazing lasagna. It was exactly the right note, acknowledging my professional achievement, while reminding me that our relationship existed independently of my career success. The new position brought challenges I hadn't anticipated, including congressional testimony, media interviews, and constant scrutiny of every decision I made. But it also brought opportunities to influence policy at the highest levels, to advocate for families like the one David and I had been, and to ensure that the systems designed to help people were actually effective. During my first congressional hearing, I was asked by a skeptical senator whether someone with my unconventional background was really qualified to oversee such a large federal program. Senator, I replied, I think my background is exactly what qualifies me for this role. I understand these programs from the perspective of someone who needed them, who used them, and who built a career helping others navigate them. I know what works and what doesn't, because I've lived it. The exchange was widely covered in the media, with most commentary focusing on how my personal experience brought valuable perspective to policy development. That evening, my phone rang with calls from reporters, colleagues, and friends who had seen the coverage. But the call that mattered most came from David. I watched the hearing, he said. You were amazing. Thank you. I was nervous about how to handle that question. You handled it perfectly. You owned your background instead of apologizing for it. You made it clear that your experience is an asset, not a liability. I learned that from you, actually. From watching you learn to be proud of our story, instead of ashamed of it. We've both learned a lot over the past few years. As we talked, I realized that our conversation felt different from any we'd had before. We were talking as equals. as two accomplished professionals who happen to be family, sharing perspectives on work and life without the complicated dynamics that had characterized our relationship for so many years. 6 months later, I was invited to give the commencement address at David's alma mater. The invitation had come through official channels, based on my federal position, and David had nothing to do with it. But as I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of graduating students, I could see him in the audience, along with Rachel and several of his colleagues who had made the trip to hear me speak. Today you're graduating into a world that will tell you success means leaving your past behind, I told the graduates. That moving up means moving away from where you came from. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Your background, your struggles, your family, your community, these aren't things to overcome. They are things to integrate, to honor, to carry forward as sources of strength and wisdom. I talked about my own journey, from single mother to federal official, emphasizing how each stage had built on the previous one rather than replacing it. The woman who worked 3 jobs to support her son taught me about persistence and sacrifice. The woman who went back to school in her 50s taught me that it's never too late to grow. The woman who rebuilt her relationship with her son taught me that families can evolve and change while maintaining their essential bonds. All of these women are part of who I am today, and all of them contributed to whatever success I've achieved. After the ceremony, David came up to the stage with tears in his eyes. That was beautiful, Mom. And true. I meant every word of it. I know you did. And I think I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me about success and family and staying true to yourself. As we stood there together, surrounded by celebrating graduates and their families, I felt a deep sense of completion, not because our story was over, but because we'd found a way to honor both our past and our present, both our individual achievements and our relationship with each other. The woman who had hidden in a hotel bathroom 5 years earlier, ashamed of her son's perception of her, had been transformed into someone who could address graduates at major universities about the value of authentic success. But more importantly, the relationship that had once been characterized by shame and distance had become one of mutual respect and genuine pride. Later that evening, at the dinner celebrating my speech, someone asked me what I was most proud of in my career. The work I'm doing now is incredibly meaningful, I said. But I think I'm most proud of raising a son who knows how to admit when he's wrong, how to support other people's growth even when it's challenging, and how to build relationships based on honesty rather than convenience. David was sitting across the table from me, and our eyes met as I spoke. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, and I knew that despite all the changes we'd both experienced, despite the geographic distance and the evolution of our relationship, the foundation we'd built together remained solid. That night, as I prepared to fly back to DC the next morning, I reflected on the journey we'd taken together. From the struggling single mother and confused son, to the successful professionals who had learned to support each other's growth while maintaining their own independence. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been moments of pain, confusion, and misunderstanding. But we'd worked through them by being willing to see each other as complex people rather than simple roles, by being honest about our fears and expectations, and by being open to growth and change. The future would bring new challenges and opportunities. David and Rachel were talking about starting a family, which would bring new dynamics to our relationship. My work in Washington would continue to evolve, potentially leading to even greater responsibilities or entirely new directions. But I felt confident now in our ability to navigate whatever changes lay ahead. We'd learned that love doesn't require proximity, that success doesn't demand sacrifice of relationships, and that families can grow stronger through honest communication and mutual respect. Standing in my DC apartment that night, looking at photos of David's graduation, our wedding dance, and my swearing-in ceremony, I smiled. We'd built something beautiful together. Not perfect, but real and lasting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.